Good morning, everyone. This is Lauren Wood Biscardi, and we are back to the Balkans with Sal Depasquale. Our usual host of Dave Marcus is not here this morning, but no worries. We're going to just take it away with Sal.
Okay, I know in following or trying to follow what's going on in the Balkans, it's difficult to keep up with who all the players are and who's fighting who, and it's complicated. And let me say, this is not unusual when you look deep into any kind of warfare, that there are a lot of side stories, that there are many tentacles to it. And to understand all that's going on, you need to really keep up with who all the players are. And so I know I've talked about this before, but I want to repeat it just to kind of reset the clock as we move on. The key combatants here are Slovenia, Croatia, and Bosnia against Serbia. We will see Kosovo become a combatant as well. But here's the difference, and that is that Croatia and Slovenia sided with Germany during World War II. So did Bosnia and Herzegovina because they were part of the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottomans were on the side of Germany. The Croatians also had the Ustasha, which was like the SS. They were the Croatian version of the SS, and they were very brutal and had a reputation and created many resentments which carried over. Um, uh, when you look at Bosnia and Herzegovina, what you have is a sizable Serbian and Croatian population that lives within the state of Bosnia and Herzegovina. So Serbia is the has the seat of the capital of Yugoslavia in Belgrade, and Serbia sided with Russia, England, and France in World War II. And so you have two different World War I and World War II factions that have hostilities going on here. And in fact, you could look at the fight in the 1990s as being a continuation of the fight from the world wars, and many antagonisms left from there. We have these nationalistic um, motivations to want to fight each other. Then we have religious factions. The Croatians and Slovenians are Roman Catholic. Bosnia has a considerable Muslim population, and Serbia is Orthodox Christian. So we also have religious confrontations that are taking place there. Different languages are present, and so we'll have ethnic conflict. So there are many sources of reasons for the war. But what you have is, when it was Yugoslavia and Tito was named the leader of Yugoslavia, remember, all of these states came under the banner of Yugoslavia. And as the head, they had Tito. And Tito was the leader of the partisans who fought against the Germans. Mind you, as I say, Croatia, Slovenia, Bosnia were on the side of Germany, but at a certain point, you had people, the Germans were not all that well liked, nor were the Ottomans well liked. And so there's peoples from these other countries who come and join the partisan fight. And so Tito, at the end of the war, is really a central power. Um, we also have antagonisms that relate to Islam. We saw in one of the videos last week a reenactment of fight with Islam 600 years ago. But keep in mind, Genghis Khan also rolled over here about 1200 years ago. So again, these are fights that where you think, well, 600 years have passed. Are they still have antagonisms about that? Yes, indeed. And that's one of the things that I find people have difficulty with when we look at international conflicts is that the resentments may date back hundreds, if not thousands of years. And it's very important when you're doing an analysis about a conflict, because if you don't know the root of the conflict, the policymakers, the people who have to make decisions, cannot actually make decisions that deal with the root. They deal with issues in the here and now and the short term. And essentially, they're putting a Band-Aid on a gushing wound. And if they don't really know the source of the conflict, they can't address it and try to find some way to resolve it. And so what's kind of ironic is that it's also an area that was known for diversity, where peoples from many different cultures, many different languages could come in contact with people and have, a pleasant environment where they weren't hateful. They were accepting, and they blended quite well. And so it's important to make a distinction between the people of the country and the leaders that ignite fears amongst the broad population that then get transformed into hate as you rally your forces to fight wars. Okay, and so let me just come out of that for a second. I want to go to, we'll get it right. Bear with me. Let me take me out of there. Come back to here. Sorry for talking to myself, but sometimes I need to do that to remember where we are. Okay. To remember where I am. We're going to look at, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we're going to look at the siege of Sarajevo. Remember, this is where the Winter Olympics were held. A beautiful city, really just a spectacular place, and it becomes totally surprised and devastated by warfare. And so if you take any environment that you look at and you think this is really pleasant, I love taking a drive up to Rome and eating outside at a restaurant and just enjoying the mountains all around me and how pretty and nice it is. Think of that scene suddenly being interrupted with warfare. And so it comes under siege for several years, and we're going to look at that. We're also going to look at the attack in Srebrenica, and I just wanted to give you a sense of where it is in juxtaposition to Sarajevo. We'll talk about the fight in Srebrenica next week and how people from here were told to leave and go to Tuzla, where they were set up to be attacked and massacred. So we will be looking at that them next week. So consequently, what we have is there's antagonisms between Croatian Serbs and the Croatian government. We have a conflict between the Bosnian Serbs and the Bosnian government, the Kosovo Serbs and the Kosovo leadership. Croatia, Bosnia, and Kosovo also have sizable Islamic communities, in contrast to the Orthodox Christian Church of Serbia and the Roman Catholics of Slovenia and Croatia. This meant that nationalist fueled antagonisms exist in addition to religious antagonisms. Okay, so Serbia. So the Balkans are prime for taking past tensions and having them erupt into warfare after Tito dies. Tito could keep a lid on it because he had all the partisans on his side. He had the stronger military police backing. But once Tito is gone, then other people want to assume control, and they start inflaming those passions, so they will go to war. Milosevic from Serbia envisions that he will be the next Tito, and he wants to be the strong man. Remember, we hear a lot about strongmen today, where he wants to be the strong man who's going to hold Yugoslavia together. Problem is that Croatia, Slovenia, they want independence. Remember, they were on the side of Germany. They want to get away from Serbia, who is on the side of Russia, England, and France.
The Yugoslav tragedy. Decades of terror. Neighbors become deadly enemies. Millions lose their homes. More than 100,000 people die. The uninhibited cruelty in the southeast of Europe unsettles the world.
Violence was used to send messages. Murder, rape, all of this was to say, if you stay, this is what will happen to you.
The ideological incendiaries are Tudjman and Milosevic. Two ruthless nationalists make the Balkan powder keg explode.
Milosevic just wanted power and wanted influence. Tudjman wanted to break up Yugoslavia, wanted to create a greater Croatia. He actually believed all this nationalist stuff.
The war drags the entire country into an abyss. Europe and the United States watch helplessly.
They didn't clearly see the interest in getting involved and arresting the bloodshed.
Why did the peoples of Yugoslavia become sworn enemies? What blame lies with Europe and the USA? It's a lesson about the failure of politics. Zagreb, the 13th of May, 1990. Yugoslavia has been simmering for a long time, but today the tensions erupt in violence. Croatian and Serbian football fans attack each other. At the time, Vjekoslav Skriniar plays for Zagreb. The Yugoslav police are especially brutal toward the Croatian fans.
It was an aggression against us, the resistance that we Croats had tried to separate from Yugoslavia.
It is a taste of what is to come. At the time, Yugoslavia is made up of 6 constituent republics: Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, Montenegro, and Macedonia. The Serbs are the largest ethnic group. More than a third of all Serbs live outside the constituent Serbian Republic.
Yugoslavia had been the first state in which all Serbs were united in a state structure. That means that with the imminent collapse of Yugoslavia, the question for the Serbs was, what will happen to the Serbian nation after Yugoslavia's downfall?
In Belgrade, Slobodan Milosevic bets on violence. Since 1987, he is the Republic of Serbia's strongman. His dream? Become as mighty as Tito once was. Slobodan Milosevic was considered a loner. He made a career with the communists as a party official. After Tito's death, Milosevic became more and more of a heated political agitator.
He saw the power of national expression, and he saw what he could do. I don't think at the beginning he was a nationalist and that he believed in it.
Milosevic wants to stop Yugoslavia's collapse, hopes for power over the entire country. But his nationalist propaganda has the opposite result. In January 1990, a special party convention of the communists in Belgrade falls apart. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Slovenians and the Croats want out of the communist system. When all of their reform proposals are rejected, the Slovenian delegates leave the hall.
The idea was greater independence, the idea that they could control their own future, that they could determine their own economic life, and that they could move towards a liberal market, European Union type version of the world.
So they, what you have is the beginning of a civil war. We have Milosevic, who is an agitator, a strong man. He votes for violence as a way for him to advance himself more than anything else. As they say, he uses nationalism to inflame his population, to gin them up to want to go to fight against the Croats and the Slovenians. But they don't really see him as being a particularly nationalist person. That is, until it served his purpose.
In Zagreb, the winner is Franjo Tudjman. Tudjman was one of Tito's partisans during World War II. He then rose to Yugoslav army general. Later, Tudjman also developed into a fanatic nationalist and was imprisoned multiple times. With Tito's death, he returned to politics. As Tudjman sees it, the Croats live under Serbian dominance, from which they have to free themselves. He wants a strong, independent Croatia. His model for that is the independent Croatia of 1941, Hitler's puppet state, where the so-called Ustasha ruled.
Everywhere you went in Croatia, once Tudjman was in power, you saw the U of the Ustasha. It was a festival of extreme Croatian nationalism, and nobody could doubt what the intentions of Tudjman were.
Franjo Tudjman and Slobodan Milosevic become fierce opponents. Both of them, the Croat and the Serb, bundle nationalist slogans and stoke deep old resentments.
They used state television in order to generate fear. Fear of an Ustasha revival, fear of a Chetnik Serbian nationalist revival. They were generating hysteria, and they did it through mass rallies as well as through the mass media.
And so what we have is the tensions are boiling for war. Tudjman in Croatia, he wants to act to remove all Serbs from the, hope I'm saying it right, Knin Police Department. This sets off an excuse to use force for ethnic cleansing of Serbs. Tudjman wants to get rid of all the Serbs. Mind you, Serbia is going to respond to that, and will now, Serbia is in the position of saying, we want to hold Yugoslavia together. So Slovenia and Croatia, you can't just go off and become independent and become like a European Union country. But Croatia is now initiating hostilities, and Serbia is going to have to start to think about its own independence.
Serbian nationalists want to split off the settlement areas around Knin from Croatia and create an autonomous Serbian area in the southwest, called the Krajina. The Croatian Ministry of the Interior sends helicopters with special forces units to Knin. Fighter jets from Belgrade intercept the helicopters and force them to land. A first showdown. Yugoslavia is on the brink of civil war.
It isn't a war yet. There is no shooting yet, no casualties, but there is a state of emergency.
In the spring of 1991, tensions escalate. The first skirmishes happen in Serbian-populated areas, the Krajina and eastern Slavonia, with casualties on both sides. For the Yugoslav central government in Belgrade, the time has come to bring the People's Army out of the barracks. The army sees its mission as defending the Yugoslav state and resolving internal conflicts.
The army tried to create buffer zones. They occupied barracks and tried to secure weapons depots so the conflict wouldn't escalate further.
A peaceful solution to the dispute between the constituent republics doesn't seem possible. Belgrade wants to preserve the Serbian dominant federal state. Slovenia and Croatia want autonomy. On the 25th of June, 1991, the Croats and the Slovenians declare their independence. The significance of this move is greatly underestimated in Europe.
The European community had just adopted the idea of a common foreign policy. It was a bright new world. We were heading towards the prospect of the European Union. The Yugoslav conflict and crisis was a blemish on that world, but it seemed that they should be able to solve this silly little problem.
Yugoslav tanks rolled towards Slovenia's borders on the 26th of June. A last attempt to hold Yugoslavia together by force. But the Slovenians are ready. The troops of the so-called territorial defense are under Slovenian control. They capture units of the Yugoslav People's Army and hold them in their barracks. After only 10 days, Belgrade gives in.
It was a symbolic attempt to keep Yugoslavia together, but that was never really in the plans to retain Slovenia.
The war in Slovenia ends so quickly because hardly any Serbs lived there.
In that sense, Slovenia was fine, because the Serbs had no territorial claims there and no Serb areas that they wanted to secure, so to say.
At this point, Slobodan Milosevic makes a choice. If the Serbian people can no longer live together in Greater Yugoslavia, then they should have a larger Serbian state, including all Serbian settlements. A third of all Serbians live outside the constituent Republic of Serbia, almost 1.4 million in Bosnia-Herzegovina, and more than 500,000 in Croatia. The first step in Milosevic's plan: split off the Serbian territories from Croatia and displace all non-Serbs, supported by units of the Yugoslav army.
So what we have is Serbia makes a move to try to hold Yugoslavia together, but it's thought that that's more for showmanship than anything else. What we have is the Serbians decide, Slovenia, you're not that important. We're going to back off a fight with you. They're now getting into a head-on-head confrontation with Croatia. And what Serbia thinks is, okay, we're going to move for independence too. You've already gotten recognition by the Germans and others. What we're going to do, we're going to go for our own independence. But we're taking these lands from you that are now occupied by Serbians, and we're going to claim that as being our land. And we're going to then get rid of all the non-Serbs from those locations. So you go ahead and be independent, take your people with you. Bosnia also is, there are Serbs living in Bosnia, and the Serbian government says we're taking those lands too that are inhabited by Serbians, and we want them to be a part of our state. So now Serbia is engaged in a battle with Croatia and with Bosnia-Herzegovina. At a certain point, they will have already gotten what they wanted when the UN intervenes and makes them stop fighting. Serbia has already gotten from Croatia what it wanted in lands. It also gets that from Bosnia. And so they let Croatia go. Croatia allows that to happen without the lands that they wanted. And now they're no longer in a fight with Serbia. So while the Bosnians had been joined with them in fighting Serbia, now that Croatia is not involved in a fight with Serbia, the Croatians say, to hell with you. And they turn on the Bosnians as well. So we're going to see that, that you have people who are joined together in a fight, and then suddenly they split off, and it's hard to keep up with that. But let's see how it plays out.
Kad Slovenija jednom ode, onda sa Hrvatima možemo drugčije razgovarati.
The Serb president asserted his legitimate interest in Croatia.
Io ebbi un colloquio a quattro occhi con Milosevic, che ricordo molto bene, in cui lui mi disse: la Croazia non può andarsene senza negoziare con noi, perché in Croazia ci sono 600.000 Serbi.
Ako mi ne osporavamo pravo nijednom narodu da izađe iz Jugoslavije, nemoguće je osporiti pravo onim narodima koji žele da ostanu u svojoj postojećoj zemlji, u Jugoslaviji, da ostanu, da žive u Jugoslaviji.
E o ci lasciano i 600.000 serbi con il loro territorio, noi non consentiremo che loro se ne vadano in maniera tranquilla e normale.
Unlike Slovenia, Croatia had a large Serb minority. Here in Vukovar, near the border with Serbia, the real war in Yugoslavia would begin. Serb nationalists in Croatia had already seized power in a dozen villages. They wanted to link them up and expel the Croats who were in their way. Then this pure Serb mini-state could join the motherland, the first step to the creation of a new Yugoslavia, run by and for the Serbs. To this end, extremist allies of President Milosevic set about provoking a conflict between Serbs and Croats.
Srpstvo je u samim korenima ugroženo. Ustaške horde atakuju na srpska sela, na srpske žene I decu.
Let me just interrupt for a second, because in his speech, he is telling them, we Serbs are vulnerable to attack. The fascists are going to come after us. We will be exposed to genocide. The argument that is made by the people who perpetrated genocide.
Ustaške horde nastoje da dovrše ono genocid nad srpskim narodom.
1991. godine počinjemo masovnije da organizujemo dobrovoljce I da ih upućujemo na već formirane frontove, posebno u istočnu Slavoniju.
Ranjena su.
And now, let's look at that fight in Vukovar.
Vukovar, a small Croatian town on the Danube. It sits in the region of Eastern Slavonia, directly on the border with Serbia. This is where the bloodiest battle of the Croatian War began on the 14th of September, 1991. The situation around Vukovar has been tense for weeks. The Croats expect an attack. But the defenders of Vukovar are helpless against the powerful Yugoslav People's Army. Belgrade is sending 30,000 soldiers and paramilitaries. On the Croatian side, there are only 3,000 men. The city is at the mercy of the Yugoslav army. Up to 8,000 grenades hit Vukovar daily. Stjepan Vidakovic was a volunteer who took command in his district of Lusak. Even today, he still doesn't understand how Serbs and Croats could kill each other.
Before the war, the coexistence between Croats and Serbs was excellent. We worked together, hung out, played football together. Everything. There was no problem at all.
After a few weeks, large sections of Vukovar lie in ruins. On the 2nd of November, 1991, Serbian fighters attacked Stjepan Vidakovic's district. This house served as a base for his men. Stjepan walks through the very halls where he was injured by a grenade.
And then the roof flew away. I stood next to the wall and I felt a blow here. And then I realized I was bleeding.
There's grenade shrapnel in his arm. Stjepan has to go to the hospital. His brother drives him there. The rest of the family stays behind.
I didn't want them to come with me. Way too dangerous. I said I'd come back quickly.
On the way to the hospital, their car comes under fire.
They shot with machine guns. And then the first tire was blown. My brother wanted to change the tire. I said, they'll shoot us. And then another tire blew. We drove to the hospital on rims.
While Stjepan Vidakovic is treated in the hospital of Vukovar, Serbian units storm his district and murder all who are still there. 9 of his family members are shot that day. Among them were his wife and son. Their remains are only found years later in a mass grave. 3 family members are still missing today.
I'm not angry with anybody. I don't hate anybody. It is unnecessary, but no one was convicted, and no one knows anything. No one has seen anything. No one was there. All innocent. Aliens just came down and killed people.
It was such a brutal and senseless shelling of a very beautiful Danubian town that it meant the Serbs were never going to recover their international standing, and nobody really wanted to be seen as supporting the Serbs.
At Germany's insistence, the European community agrees in mid-December to recognize Slovenia and Croatia as independent states.
Germany had just been reunited and insisted on the people's right to self-determination. But the Serbs said, we also have that right, and if the Serbian people want to live together in one state, then it should be allowed to do so.
In January 1992, the UN manages to negotiate a ceasefire with Slobodan Milosevic. when the military conflict in Croatia is frozen, Slobodan Milosevic has already achieved his goals. 1/3 of the country is under Serbian control.
In one sense, the ceasefire was the beginning of the end of the war in Croatia, but it was the beginning of the war in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And so it was, I think, under the circumstances, probably the only thing that the United Nations could do.
So as the fight with Croatia fades into the background, Serbia turns its attention on Bosnia. A Bosnian Serb, Ratko Mladic, leads the Yugoslav army in removing those non-Serbs. And what you are now having is the Bosnian Serbs, that are going to act against the non-Serbs in Bosnia.
The Bosnian Serb Ratko Mladic is the commander in charge of military operations in Krajina.
Službi otadžbine Socijalističke federativne republike Jugoslavije sa mojim drugovima, starešinama i svih iz redova svih naroda i narodnosti i sa svojim vojnicima.
His neutrality is a facade. Mladic only fights for Serbian interests. Ratko Mladic was 2 years old when his father was murdered by Croatian nationalists. This is probably one of the reasons why, as a colonel in the Yugoslavian People's Army, he is ruthless in his actions against the Croatian population. He's considered an ice-cold strategist. The first Croatian village that Mladic targets in August 1991 is Kijevo. He field tests his strategy there, and from then on, it's always the same. The army advances with heavy weapons, pushing the population to flee. Anyone who stays is murdered by the invading fighters.
One of the roles of the paramilitary forces is to do those things that others will not do, in a sense, to do the dirty work. Often they're recruited prisoners who've been let out of jail, given the offer of a deal, stay in jail or come out and do this kind of work.
People who had already slipped into the lower classes in the 1980s now see an opportunity to enrich themselves personally or to live out their resentments.
Paramilitaries like the infamous Scorpioni burn down houses, plunder, massacre, destroy churches and cemeteries. The Serbs call this ethnic cleansing.
This is about making the survival of an ethnic religious group in a particular area impossible.
By the end of August, Serb fighters with military support from Belgrade have brought the entire Knin region under their control. Meanwhile, Croatian President Tudjman calls on the European community to intervene, but they disagree on how to assess the conflict.
At that time, the outbreak of conflict was portrayed by our media as a conflict in which poor Croatia rightfully defended itself against these invaders and aggressors from Serbia. In Paris, they saw a completely different war. There, a conflict was presented in which the good soldiers of Yugoslavia tried to stop the disintegration of Yugoslavia while suffering considerable losses.
This is partly due to historical ties. In the First World War, the Serbs fought on the side of the English, French, and Russians, while the Croats, as citizens of Austria-Hungary, fought alongside the Germans.
The most important reason for European inability to act in the face of the Yugoslav crisis was different perceptions and interests. The states that had minorities within their own borders, like the French, the Spanish, the Greeks, were opposed to Yugoslavia dissolving and the idea that populations could invoke the right of self-determination and form their own states. They feared a precedent.
In September 1991, the European community invited the parties to a peace conference in The Hague.
The fighting must stop.
There's no agreement in sight.
Hrvatski je narod, jedan od najstarijih povijesnih naroda Europe, koji je unatoč tragici svog geopolitičkog položaja uspio očuvati kontinuitet svoje državnosti.
The points of view are far apart. Both sides see themselves as victims.
Installing of totalitarian chauvinist regime in Croatia directly violated human rights, peace, and an overall democratic development in Yugoslavia.
The European community is proving powerless to prevent the beginning of bloodshed on European soil.
But we must add that at least we have them trying to do something. So it is, it's quickly unraveling, but they are trying to assert some form of leadership and will eventually have to intervene with UN troops to bring a halt to the massacre that takes place. Bosnian Serb Radovic Karadzic. He wants to remain in Yugoslavia, where Serbia is the main force. Others want a small, independent, and multi-ethnic Bosnia. So what you have is kind of a civil war within a civil war.
Bosnia-Herzegovina, a microcosm of Yugoslavia. Catholic Croats, Bosnian Muslims, and Orthodox Serbs live here. But after Slovenia and Croatia leave Yugoslavia, Bosnian Croats and Muslims fear Serbian dominance.
The memories of the Second World War were also reawakened when Serbian nationalists slaughtered and expelled thousands of Muslims and Croats. And there was a very real fear that such slaughters could happen again.
The man chosen to lead Bosnia-Herzegovina into independence is Alija Izetbegović. He has been president of the Bosnian Constituent Republic since 1990. As a young Muslim activist, Alija Izetbegović wrote essays about political Islam. Under Tito, he was considered a dissident and was imprisoned twice. The career lawyer only found his way into politics later in life. His goal now is to preserve Bosnia-Herzegovina as a small multi-ethnic state. In Bosnia-Herzegovina, Muslims have lived alongside Christians and Jews for centuries, a legacy from Ottoman times. Bosnian Muslims call themselves Bosniaks. The Bosnian Serbs, led by Radovan Karadzic, want to remain part of Yugoslavia. They make up about a third of the Bosnian population and fight bitterly against Bosnia's independence.
If it happened, then we would have absolutely uncontrolled processes in Bosnia and Herzegovina with terrible ethnical and religious war.
Radovan Karadzic came to Sarajevo as a teenager. He studied medicine, became a psychiatrist, but identifies as a poet above all. Later, he entered politics and became leader of the Bosnian Serbs.
Karadzic was obsessed with creating a Serbian state in which all Serbs would live together and from which all non-Serbs would have to disappear, especially the Bosnian Muslims, whom he regarded as the original enemy of the Serbian people, as something foreign and inferior.
In the summer of 1991, when war breaks out in Croatia, hundreds of people take to the streets in Sarajevo to demonstrate for peace. The highlight of the movement is a concert in the 1984 Olympic Hall, a place that symbolizes a time of peaceful coexistence in Yugoslavia.
Sarajevo will soon be under siege. I've tried to make the point that what's happening here is not unique to here. And I can go into war after war after war and find the same things happening. Part of my argument is that we seem to respond to all of these events in the same way. We never get to the root causes to want to, actually solve a problem. And I'm not saying that it's something that can be done overnight. It needs to take place over a very long period of time. But if you don't deal with the root causes, don't think it's going to go away. I mentioned Genghis Khan a little earlier ago. Again, pure brutality. But I just want you to know about another person from an area that was part of the Balkans, Romania. You've all heard of Dracula.
In his native tongue, he is called Dracula. This is not the vampire, Count Dracula, but a real historical figure, a Romanian prince.
He was celebrated throughout Christendom for his achievements against the Turks.
Dracula was a warlord who became known all across Europe for both his breathtaking courage and his terrifying cruelty.
What drove him again and again was a need for survival, a need for affirmation, and a driving need to torture.
Well, and there are many of his ilk throughout, let me just see what I have here, throughout history, and we need to be cognizant of that. Okay, let me see, am I out of share here? Yes, I am. Okay, we can open up for discussion.
Okay, if you have questions or comments, today's co-host, George Weeder, will help me out with getting everybody heard, or you can drop anything you have in our chat box as well. My observation is that, of course, we have this us and them thing that happens everywhere. But when you look at these people, they have to be genetically almost all identical because they look so much alike. They're so the differences are kind of like all I'm not going to say made up, but a little bit manufactured in terms of making this us and them thing work, because the population, I mean, just look at all the people that they talked about in the interviews. They look identical.
Yeah, I mean, part of my argument is that all of the stuff of nationalism, religious superiority, racial superiority, all of that stuff is a contrivance. It is they are merely tools for agitating, for leadership to agitate the population and gin them up to want to go to fight and kill each other. That's all it is. you know, when you dig down into the differences just in religions, I mean, really, you've got to work pretty hard to say this is something radically different than the other. It's just again,
because they come from all the same roots.
There's simply tools. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So what else does any other thoughts on all of this? It's gosh, it just seems like just never ending. But as you say, we're seeing this everywhere, and we see. I mean, it's been used in our own country, time and again.
I think you have to see it going on right now. This is very much similar to what we're watching on our own local news. Mind you, the template for mad people to want to seize power at really with no restraint on what will happen to other human beings. This is not something new. And as we dig deeper and deeper into history, we find, you know, the tales that we've been told about glory and honor and all of that stuff. It's just a tale. It's not true. You get behind the screen and what you come to find is the same kind of mass brutality takes place. And so we kind of have this image of the world we're in as being a safe place, and it's not, and hasn't been for thousands of years. One of the points I tried to make early on was that when we look at things like the Earth, how did the continents form? They didn't form overnight. It took millions of years. It was a slow process. But eventually, what we come to know today is what eventually evolved. If we really want to deal with a world in which humans are the most formidable predator on the earth, we can do it. We can't expect it to change overnight. And it won't happen in our lifetime, but it can happen. And it is possible. And I think it's imperative that we start to recognize the manipulations that take place so we can resist it, and that we can take note of things like when the UN, as ineffectively as it has done some things. It is, you know, it hasn't been around all that long. It's going to take a much longer history for the UN to really gain power. But if we look at where we were at the turn of the 20th century, today we have the UN, we have the World Trade Organization, the World Health Organizations, the World Bank. We have a lot of the European Union. I mean, all of that is, in my mind, at least a movement to say we want to take control over brutality and attacks and all of that stuff so we can live as humans. But it's going to take it'll probably take as long as it took for Pangea to break up and for the continents to form.
God, if we're still alive by that time.
Mind you, let me say, if our species does not survive, the planet won't. I mean, life on the planet will be gone. We have that capability. And we're you know, I just have to think that there really is a lesson in the dinosaurs who thought that they had domain over the earth. And then, you know, a pebble hit the earth one day and they ain't no more. So, you know, don't get too complacent. I think it is imperative, though, that we keep advocating and attempting to advance the idea of we have to learn how to play nice in the sandbox with each other. Mind you, while this stuff is going on, In Rwanda, they're killing people, by the second. So, this is going on in a lot of places. I mean, and it's, I mean, I hate to spark, if we bring up what's going on in Gaza, some people can get very emotional about it and all of that. But make no mistake about it, you're looking at what is a severe human tragedy. This is, I mean, I know there's a legal definition for what is genocide, but it's coming awfully close to it. Starving a population to death is a horrific way to deal with a problem. Yeah,
For sure. Cynthia, you had your hand up earlier. Do you want to join in?
Well, I was pretty much going to say what Sal says. You see it on the news. It's, being used by politicians in our own country. There's a movie that I saw information about. I have not seen it, called Civil War, that is apparently opening soon. And it ain't good, obviously. And I don't know any answer either, but this is what's that curse? You live in it, may you live in interesting times. This is a very interesting.
Yeah, and just when you contemplate the weaponry that is available today, and mind you, not just nuclear bombs, the biological and the chemical weapons are horrific. We're in trouble. And, when people, you have those who have a lot of power and influence who are saying, well, I don't really like this, but I might get a bigger tax break next year. It really is so frivolous and, whistling, but it's whistling by the graveyard. But, I was listening to a story, I'm sure I've mentioned it before, but where these, Silicon Valley people and others gathered together for a conference, and they brought in this professor from City College of New York, who's noted for being able to be a futurist and to say where technology is going and all that. So they bring him out to their conference, and and he's come prepared to talk about where technology is going. And he said the questions that he got really didn't have anything to do with the technology. What are we going to do to protect ourselves? Because we know people are going to want to come and kill us. So they're building these condominiums inside of, mountains and stuff like that to try to find a way to insulate themselves. But there is no insulation from it. If you allow, with the weaponry we have today, to allow the antagonisms to bring us back into the, 2000 BCE, we're in trouble. We're in very big trouble.
Yeah, and the survivalists think they're the ones that are going to be able to survive, but it'll get everybody.
Susan, do you have anything for us today? We have to, did we get you unmuted? There we go. No, you're still muted.
So, okay.
There we go.
Well, after having had almost a decade in Bosnia and then into the West Bank. So don't get me started on the people that I worked with from Gaza or helped in Gaza, because it's all so real. And they, and as an American going into those places, not as a tourist, but as somebody who had an idea about how if we could only just help a few, it made a difference. But what in Bosnia I seem to realize is, yeah, everybody looks alike. And except at that particular time, their first names would give away whether they Serb, Croat, or Bosniak. and that was a shock to me. And then I began to think about tribal living and what people, human nature seems to need is to be with other people who think like them. So to be with the same religion. And even if they try to start having intermarriages, something has to happen for the families on both sides that have to accept the other from the other side. So in Sarajevo, you had mixed marriages all over the place. But when the war broke out and the politicians skillfully used fear to get people to pick up weapons to kill family members, I sort of went back to the only thing that feels safe to any human being is to live with your own kind, because it seems to keep a lid on fear. So the fear of the other is one of the things. Our organization had many conversations about, much artwork about, what is the other to you? How can you tell who the other is when they look exactly like you? And what if you don't know their name or where they live? So one of the things that I had to enjoy was the sitting quietly and listening to the stereotypes about me, an American who's coming in without the support of the government or a religious organization. Who is this woman? She must be rich, was the assumption. And then they found out I'm just an ordinary kind of citizen who had an idea. And and they'd argue over me about, why would you do this? Why do you care about us? Your government didn't come here and bomb the enemy. And so it was a learning process for me. And so important as an American to see how people do group together and what it takes to create a fear and an emotional response within ourselves to survive that would cause us to actually kill our own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what I find fascinating is the almost endless capability of those who want to incite a war to find something that will make you an other. In the ethnic neighborhoods where I grew up, as I've said before, my family was not, prejudiced against anyone. They hated everybody. And it didn't matter. And if it was the Greeks or the Jews or the Irish or the Norwegians, it would be, look at that red book carrying SOB. What? Well, he's carrying a book that's a color. And so I'll find something that I will be able to use to make us an us and a them. It is key to accomplishing the objectives of initiating a war and violence. And it's almost like there's there is a checklist of things that they have to do. And, as I said before, all of those things are contrivances. They're made up. So, they'll find more and more.
So before we wrap up here, Coral, was there something that you had?
I was just going to comment that the delicate balance between individual and big brother is so tiny and so delicate. We all must be very careful in all directions. But thanks, Sal.
Yeah, I hear you. I understand. You're right. It is up to us to all recognize when people are manipulating us to subscribe to their deed and to resist that. And it's very interesting how, you know, I could observe in a work environment where would get tested. Are you going to laugh at this, you know, racial joke, right? And so you know, you want to get along with everyone. You don't want people to think you're weird, so you go. I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it, and I didn't care. And I would look back and I'd say, do I have stupid written on my face? Why are you telling me that joke? But understand, when I did that, I then became labeled as, you know, not one of the gang. But that's the pressure, and it's the tool. It's how they use them look. I'm convinced when we look at the people who would go to watch a lynching, and mind you, everyone from the small town would go. Now, I don't believe all of them were in support of that lynching. I believe, and there is some evidence to validate this, that they went because they knew if they didn't go, they would be identified as a threat to those who were perpetrating the lynchings. And they would put their family at risk. So you go along to get along, right? And so it's an interesting phenomenon. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have, I hope I didn't miss this, but do you have a couple of thoughts about what's coming up next week?
Next week, we're going to do Srebrenica. And we're going to look at what happened there. We're now into the war and ethnic cleansing, and Serbia is going to initiate you know, the idea of we have to get, they're going to do what was done in Rwanda and in other places. So we're going to look at that. And then the following week, we're going to look at Sarajevo. Then we're going to follow that with the trials that took place, where the International Court has attempted to hold people accountable for what happened, and we'll examine those aspects.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming, and we hope to see you again next week.
Okay, thanks everybody. I hope you're getting something out of this, and that we're able to manage keeping the different players so you can, you know, keep a scorecard. And no, it's complicated. But even if you can't, though, there's lessons that what I find so useful, fruitful about examining what happened in the Balkans is it becomes exemplary of all many battles and things that have been done. And it makes, mind you, my argument is we've got to wait a couple of million years before we fix all this stuff. But it really is that if you don't get to the root cause, don't think you're going to fix it.
And that is our concluding thought, the final word, as Lawrence O'Donnell would say. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody, please be safe. We'll see you next week.